In 1250, the most powerful man in Egypt was a slave. Not a metaphor, a literal slave, bought as a boy from the steppes of Central Asia, raised in barracks, trained to kill. And for 2.5 centuries, the Mamluks didn't just rule Egypt, they built one of the most durable military machines in history. This is the story of a political system that defied every rule of power. A system where sons could not inherit, where every generation of rulers was born anew from slavery. It's a story of paradoxes, a slave elite, a hereditary, non-hereditary monarchy, and it worked for over 250 years. To understand the Mamluks, you have to start with the Ayyubids, the dynasty founded by Saladin himself. Saladin, the Kurdish warrior who recaptured Jerusalem from the Crusaders. His empire stretched from Egypt to Syria. But every empire faces the same problem: how to keep an army loyal. And Saladin's heirs found a solution. They bought slaves, young boys from the Kipchak steppes, north of the Black Sea, Turks mostly, pagans some. They were bought, converted to Islam, and trained as soldiers. The Arabic word for owned or slave is Mamluk, and these slave soldiers became the backbone of the Ayyubid army. They had no local ties, no family to betray them. Their loyalty was to their master alone, in theory. By the mid-13th century, the Ayyubid Sultan was a man who trusted his own family and his own guards. He ignored the Mamluks who had won his battles. And in 1250, they turned on him. It was a coup. The Mamluks assassinated the last Ayyubid Sultan of Egypt. And who did they put on the throne? A woman, Shajar al-Dur, the widow of the previous sultan, a former slave herself. Shajar al-Dur ruled for just 3 months, but her reign marked a turning point. The Mamluks had tasted power. She married a Mamluk commander who became sultan, and so began the Mamluk Sultanate. But here's the twist. The Mamluks didn't just replace one dynasty with another. They built a system that was fundamentally different. In most monarchies, power passes from father to son. The Mamluks rejected that completely. The sons of Mamluks, called Al-Wad al-Nas, children of the people, could not inherit their father's rank. They were free, but they were not Mamluks. Why? Because the Mamluks knew that inherited power breeds decadence. A sultan's son is a prince, raised in luxury, surrounded by flatterers. He's soft. But a slave boy, taken from his family, thrown into a barracks, trained until his body is a weapon. He's hard, he's hungry, he has something to prove. So the Mamluks built a pipeline, a machine that took raw boys from the steppes and turned them into elite warriors, and then rulers. Step 1. The slave market, the Black Sea coast. Genoese and Venetian merchants sold Kipchak Turks, Circassians, and others to Mamluk agents. The boys were brought young, 10, 12, 14. They were brought to Cairo, sometimes by the thousands. Step 2. The barracks, the Tibak. They were housed in the citadel of Cairo, in a massive complex of training academies. Here they were converted to Islam. They learned Arabic, they learned the Quran, and they learned to fight. The training was brutal. Furusiya, the art of horsemanship, archery, and swordsmanship. They practiced for hours every day in the desert heat. They learned to shoot a bow from horseback, both directions. They learned to wield a lance, a sword, a mace. They were forged into weapons. And they learned loyalty to their ustad, their master, the man who bought them, and to their kushdashia, their brothers in arms, the boys they trained with. After years of training, they were manumitted, freed, and only then could they become full Mamluks, eligible for rank and command. But freedom was just the beginning. They had to prove themselves, in battle, in administration, in the cutthroat politics of the court. The system was a meritocracy, sort of. You rose through skill and patronage. If you were good enough, you could become an emir, a commander, even sultan. Take Baybars, a Kipchak Turk sold as a slave in the 1240s. He rose to be a commander, then sultan. He's one of the greatest military leaders in Islamic history.
But Baybars's rise was forged in crisis. A few decades after the founding coup, the Mongols sacked Baghdad. The Ayyubid Caliphate was destroyed. The Islamic world was in panic. The Mongols were unstoppable. They had conquered China, Persia, Russia, and now they were heading for Egypt. In 1260, a Mongol army invaded Syria. The Mamluks, under their sultan, marched to meet them. At the Battle of Ain Jalut, in modern-day Israel, the Mamluks faced the Mongols. The Mamluks used a classic tactic. They feigned retreat, drawing the Mongols into a trap. Then they turned and slaughtered them. The Mongol general was captured and executed. It was the first time the Mongols had lost a major battle. The Mamluks had saved Egypt and the Islamic world. But the Sultan didn't enjoy his victory for long. On the way back to Cairo, he was assassinated by a group of emirs, including Baybars. Baybars became Sultan. He ruled for 17 years. He not only held off the Mongols, he turned the Mamluks into a true empire. He built alliances. He reformed the army. He constructed postal routes, fortresses, and a navy. He was a builder as much as a warrior. But the Crusaders were still a threat. The Mamluks had been fighting them for decades, and by the late 13th century, the Crusader states were on their last legs. Over a century after the founding coup, the Mamluks laid siege to Accra, the last major Crusader stronghold. The siege lasted just over a month. Accra fell. The Mamluks massacred the defenders. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem was finished. The Mamluks had achieved what generations of Muslim armies had failed to do. They had expelled the Crusaders from the Holy Land. But even as they triumphed, the system was changing. The Badri Mamluks, the Kipchak Turks, were being replaced by a new group. A few decades later, a Circassian Mamluk named Barkok seized the throne. He founded a new dynasty. The Circassian Mamluks had taken over. The Circassians were from the Caucasus, not the steppes, but they followed the same system: buy, train, free, fight, rule. The Mamluks continued to dominate the region, but the world was changing. Gunpowder was changing warfare, and a new power was rising: the Ottomans. The Ottomans had their own elite slave soldiers, the Janissaries, but they had also embraced firearms. The Mamluks, for all their skill, were slow to adapt. In 1516, the Ottoman Sultan Selim I invaded Syria. The Mamluk Sultan met him at Marj Debek, near Aleppo. The Mamluks fought bravely, but the Ottoman cannons were decisive. The Mamluk Sultan was killed. The Mamluks were routed. A year later, in 1517, the Ottomans invaded Egypt. At the Battle of Raidania, near Cairo, the Mamluks made their last stand. They lost again. The Ottoman army entered Cairo. The Mamluk Sultan was captured and hanged. Egypt became a province of the Ottoman Empire. The Mamluk Sultanate was over, after 267 years. But the Mamluks didn't disappear. They survived as a class, a shadow elite, under Ottoman rule. They even regained some power until they were finally crushed by Muhammad Ali in 1811. The Mamluks were a contradiction, slaves who became kings. A military aristocracy that never passed on its power, a system that seemed insane but worked for centuries. They were the ultimate meritocracy, built on the backs of stolen children, and they proved that sometimes the most unlikely systems are the most durable.